Autumn 1944, a muddy field hospital near the Siegfried Line. Sergeant Thomas "Doc" Riley faced a screaming soldier, his leg shattered, conventional anesthesia minutes away. Every second counted, not just for pain, but for survival amidst the relentless shelling. He prepared a controversial method, one that promised instant relief if it didn't fail catastrophically. To understand how it happened, we must go back to the brutal realities of battlefield medicine in World War II. The conflict, spanning continents and involving millions of combatants and civilians, pushed the boundaries of human endurance and medical innovation to their absolute limits. From the scorching deserts of North Africa to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, soldiers faced injuries of unprecedented scale and severity. Medical personnel, often operating under direct enemy fire in makeshift tents or bombed-out buildings, were tasked with saving lives with severely limited resources and under immense, unrelenting pressure. The sheer volume of casualties, combined with the primitive conditions of frontline aid stations, meant that pain management was a constant, agonizing challenge. Morphine, while effective, was a precious commodity, often reserved for the most critical cases, and its administration could be agonizingly slow, taking several minutes to take full effect. Ether and chloroform, traditional anesthetics, while powerful, required careful handling, specialized equipment, and significant time for induction and recovery, luxuries rarely afforded in the chaos of combat. Soldiers often endured excruciating pain during initial wound dressing, the removal of shrapnel or even emergency amputations, their screams echoing through makeshift tents, a grim and haunting soundtrack to the war. This stark reality fueled a desperate, unspoken search for faster, more reliable methods to alleviate suffering, not just for humanitarian reasons, but also to stabilize patients more quickly and improve their overall chances of survival. The psychological toll of such pain was immense, not only on the wounded, but also on the medics and surgeons who bore witness to it daily, feeling the weight of their inability to provide immediate comfort. It was a war fought not just with bullets and bombs, but against the relentless agony of shattered bodies and broken spirits. The need for rapid, effective pain relief was not merely a comfort, it was a strategic imperative. A silent battle fought by dedicated individuals against overwhelming odds, striving to bring a moment of peace amidst the storm of war, to preserve sanity and hope in the face of unimaginable horror. The specific situation that gave rise to Sergeant Riley's method was born from the relentless, grinding combat on the Western Front in late 1944. Allied forces were pushing inexorably into Germany, encountering fierce and fanatical resistance from a desperate enemy fighting on its home soil. The Siegfried Line, a formidable network of bunkers, dragon's teeth anti-tank defenses, and fortified positions, became a brutal meat grinder, producing a steady, horrifying stream of wounded soldiers. Field hospitals, often hastily set up in barns, abandoned farmhouses, school buildings, or even large canvas tents just a few miles behind the front lines, were constantly overwhelmed. The sounds of battle were never far off, the distant rumble of artillery, the staccato burst of machine gun fire, the terrifying whistle of incoming mortars, and the ever-present drone of aircraft overhead. Casualties arrived ceaselessly, often covered in thick mud, their own blood and the grim dust of battle, their uniforms torn and soaked, their bodies mangled by high-explosive shrapnel, bullets, and the concussive force of explosions. The medical teams, exhausted, understaffed, and often traumatized themselves, worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower. Surgical procedures, ranging from setting complex compound fractures to removing deeply embedded shrapnel and performing emergency amputations, were performed with a speed born of necessity, but often at the cost of adequate pain control. The standard procedure involved administering morphine, but its effects were not instantaneous, and the limited supply meant it couldn't be used for every soldier requiring immediate intervention, especially for localized injuries that still needed rapid manipulation. For many, the first moments of medical care were a continuation of their battlefield nightmare, a new kind of torment inflicted by the very hands trying to save them. The psychological impact on these men, already traumatized by the horrors of combat, was profound, often leading to deeper shock and a prolonged recovery. They needed not just physical healing, but a moment of respite, a brief escape from the agony that threatened to consume them. It was in this crucible of suffering and urgent need that the seeds of an unconventional solution began to germinate. Driven by a medic who refused to accept the status quo, who heard the cries of the wounded not just as sounds, but as a direct challenge to his ingenuity and compassion. The pressure was immense, the stakes immeasurable, and the conventional tools often fell tragically short. Sergeant Thomas Riley, a medic with the U.S. Army's 1st Infantry Division, was not a man of conventional thought or rigid adherence to dogma. Born in a small, gritty mining town in central Pennsylvania in 1918, Riley had grown up witnessing hardship, resilience, and the stark realities of physical labor and industrial accidents. His father, a stoic coal miner, had instilled in him a deep respect for hard work, a pragmatic approach to problem-solving, and an unwavering sense of duty to his community. Thomas had initially pursued a pre-medical track at a local college, driven by a quiet but powerful ambition to alleviate suffering and understand the intricate workings of the human body. However, the economic devastation of the Great Depression cut short his formal education, forcing him to work odd jobs, including as a mine first aid attendant, to support his struggling family. Despite this setback, his fascination with medicine never waned. He devoured medical textbooks, often borrowing them from the local library or from sympathetic doctors, and spent countless hours studying anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology, often by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. When the war broke out, he immediately volunteered, his existing medical background and practical experience earning him a place in the Army Medical Corps, a path he embraced with solemn determination. Riley was a man of medium build, with sharp, intelligent, and deeply observant eyes that seemed to miss little. He possessed an almost preternatural, calm demeanor, even under the most intense pressure of combat, a trait that immediately put wounded soldiers at ease, instilling a sense of trust and security. His hands, though calloused from years of manual labor, were surprisingly deft, precise, and gentle, capable of intricate work under duress. He spoke with a soft, reassuring voice, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the battlefield, offering words of comfort and encouragement. But beneath this composed exterior lay a fierce determination, an innovative spirit, and an almost rebellious refusal to accept limitations. He was known among his peers for his unorthodox solutions to common problems, often improvising with whatever materials were at hand, always seeking a better way. He believed deeply that every soldier deserved not just treatment, but dignity, and that included freedom from unnecessary pain. His personal philosophy was simple, yet profound. If there was a better, more humane way to care for the wounded, he would find it, regardless of how unconventional or absurd it might seem to others. This relentless drive, combined with his innate intelligence, deep empathy, and a quiet courage to challenge the status quo, would soon lead him to question and ultimately transform the very foundations of battlefield pain management. Thomas Riley's journey into the medical field began not in a pristine operating theater, but in the gritty, dangerous world of coal mining. His early life in rural Pennsylvania, marked by the constant threat of industrial accidents, provided an unconventional but profoundly invaluable foundation for his later work. He witnessed firsthand the immediate brutal consequences of severe injury. crushed limbs, severe burns, respiratory ailments from gas explosions, and the desperate need for quick, effective intervention. He saw men endure agonizing pain with stoic silence or guttural screams, and observed the limited, often crude methods available for their care, which frequently involved little more than whiskey and a bite stick. This environment, far removed from any academic setting, taught him practical first aid, the critical importance of sterile technique, even if rudimentary, and the immense psychological impact of pain on a patient's will to survive. He learned to improvise, to make do with what was available, and to act decisively and without hesitation under pressure. These were lessons that no medical school curriculum could fully replicate, forging a medic who was resourceful and unflappable. When he finally enrolled in college, his pre-medical studies were not just theoretical. They were deeply informed by his real-world experiences, giving him a unique perspective. He excelled in anatomy and pharmacology, understanding the mechanisms of the human body and the effects of various compounds with an intuitive grasp that often surprised his more academically inclined professors. The onset of the war, however, redirected his path from a civilian doctor to a military medic. He joined the Army Medical Corps, eager to apply his knowledge and dedication to a cause he deeply believed in, driven by a desire to protect others from the suffering he had so often witnessed. His initial experiences as a medic were a baptism by fire, a relentless trial by combat. He served through the North African campaign, then the brutal landings and fighting in Sicily, and finally the grinding, bloody campaigns up the Italian peninsula. He saw the full spectrum of battlefield trauma, devastating gunshot wounds, horrific shrapnel injuries that tore flesh and bone, concussive blast injuries, and severe burns from exploding vehicles. He quickly became adept at triage, making split-second decisions about who could be saved, who needed immediate life-saving intervention, and who, tragically, was beyond help. He became a master at stopping arterial bleeding, expertly splinting complex fractures, and administering plasma transfusions under fire. But one aspect of his duties weighed heavily on him, gnawing at his conscience: the pervasive, agonizing pain endured by the wounded. He watched countless soldiers, brave men who had faced down enemy fire without flinching, break down in tears or go into profound shock from the sheer intensity of their injuries during treatment. Morphine was scarce. Its effects were not immediate, and its delayed onset often meant minutes of unbearable suffering for the patient and agonizing helplessness for the medic. He experimented with various techniques, trying to distract patients with conversation, using local pressure points, or even applying ice when available, but these were often insufficient against the overwhelming tide of pain. He observed that many soldiers, even those with severe wounds, often had a brief period of relative numbness immediately after the injury, a phenomenon he correctly attributed to the body's natural release of adrenaline and the onset of shock. He wondered if this natural window could be exploited, or if a more targeted, immediate approach to local anesthesia could be developed. The transition to the Western Front in late 1944 brought with it a new level of intensity and a renewed, desperate urgency to his quest. The fighting was often close quarters, brutal and relentless, characterized by house-to-house combat and entrenched positions. The sheer number of casualties arriving at the aid stations was staggering, and the need for rapid patient stabilization became paramount. It was here, amidst the mud, blood, and freezing rain of France and Belgium, that Riley's observations, frustrations, and intellectual curiosity coalesced into a radical, almost heretical idea. He began to study the anatomy of nerve pathways with renewed vigor, poring over diagrams in his spare moments, even sketching them meticulously in his journal. He theorized that if he could precisely target specific nerve bundles with a concentrated dose of local anesthetic, he could achieve rapid, profound pain relief for localized injuries, effectively bypassing the systemic delays and side effects of morphine. He knew it would be unconventional, perhaps even absurd, to some of his more conservative medical colleagues, but the potential to spare even one soldier from agonizing pain was a powerful, driving motivator that overshadowed any fear of professional censure. He was ready to challenge the established norms, driven by the silent screams of the wounded and his unwavering commitment to their well-being, a commitment forged in the crucible of his own experiences. The dilemma facing battlefield medics was stark and unforgiving: how to provide rapid, effective pain relief for severe injuries when traditional methods were too slow, too scarce, or too cumbersome for the chaos and urgency of the front lines. Standard practice often involved a shot of morphine, typically administered subcutaneously or intramuscularly, but its onset could take several agonizing minutes, and its systemic effects might not be ideal for immediate surgical intervention, potentially masking symptoms or depressing respiration. Local anesthetics like procaine were indeed available, but their application was typically reserved for smaller, superficial wounds or required multiple, time-consuming injections to achieve a broad field block, which was often impractical and dangerous under fire. The rules of engagement for pain management were dictated by necessity, resource limitations, and the grim calculus of war, often prioritizing speed of evacuation and basic stabilization over comprehensive comfort. Medics were primarily trained to stop bleeding, prevent shock, and stabilize the patient for transport to a more advanced medical facility, with pain relief being a secondary, albeit critical concern that often had to wait. The prevailing wisdom was that some pain was an inevitable, unavoidable reality of war, a grim tax on survival. However, Sergeant Riley saw this not as an inevitability to be accepted, but as a profound challenge to be overcome. He believed that the current approach was insufficient, causing unnecessary suffering, prolonging shock, and potentially hindering a soldier's recovery by exacerbating psychological trauma. He understood the immense constraints under which they operated, but he also recognized the immense psychological and physiological benefits of immediate, profound pain cessation. His internal struggle was whether to adhere strictly to established, albeit imperfect, protocols, or to risk censure, professional disapproval, and potential failure by pursuing a radical, untested method that promised a better, more humane outcome for the wounded soldiers under his care. The moment of decision, sharp and undeniable, arrived during a particularly brutal engagement near the German border, amidst a relentless artillery barrage. A young private, barely out of his teens, no older than 18, was brought into Riley's aid station, his arm mangled by a grenade blast. The bone was shattered, tendons exposed and shredded, and arterial bleeding was profuse, painting the stretcher crimson. The boy was screaming, a raw, primal sound of pure agony, his eyes wide with terror and shock, his body already going into profound physiological shock. The field surgeon, Captain Miller, a gruff but highly competent and experienced man, was preparing to administer morphine, knowing full well it would be a few agonizing minutes before any significant relief came. He also knew that the boy's critical condition required immediate, precise intervention to save the limb, and the violent thrashing and involuntary movements from the pain made this nearly impossible, risking further damage. Riley watched the harrowing scene unfold, the private's cries tearing at his very soul. He saw the fear, the raw, unadulterated suffering that he had witnessed countless times before, etched onto the faces of so many young men. But this time, something clicked into place, a culmination of weeks of intense study and quiet experimentation. He had spent countless hours poring over nerve maps, visualizing the precise anatomical points where a single, well-placed injection could effectively block sensation to an entire limb. He had practiced the technique meticulously on cadavers during brief lulls in the fighting, refining his approach, identifying the landmarks, and perfecting his needle placement. He knew the inherent risks. A misplaced injection could cause permanent nerve damage, or a too rapid administration of a concentrated dose could lead to systemic toxicity, even cardiac arrest. But the alternative was to let this young man endure unimaginable, soul-crushing pain, potentially pushing him deeper into irreversible shock and jeopardizing the very limb they were trying to save. He made his choice, a silent, resolute commitment to his patient. Without a word, Riley moved with a practiced, almost surgical grace. He grabbed a syringe already loaded with a concentrated solution of procaine, a local anesthetic he had carefully prepared. His movements were fluid, precise, and economical, born of countless hours of study, practice, and the grim necessity of the battlefield. He quickly identified the brachial plexus, the complex network of nerves controlling the arm, located deep in the shoulder and neck region, a delicate and critical area. With a steady, unwavering hand, he inserted the needle, not into the muscle, but directly adjacent to the nerve bundle, a technique known as a brachial plexus nerve block. He injected the anesthetic rapidly, but with meticulous care, ensuring proper placement and avoiding intravascular injection. It was a technique that demanded not only profound anatomical mastery, but also an incredibly steady hand and absolute, unshakable confidence in his own abilities. The private, who had been screaming moments before, suddenly went utterly silent. His eyes, though still wide with the after-effects of terror, lost their raw agony, replaced by a dawning comprehension and then profound relief. The pain, which had consumed him entirely, was gone, replaced by a strange, heavy numbness. The entire process, from Riley's decisive action to the complete cessation of pain, had taken less than 30 seconds. Captain Miller, who had been about to administer morphine, stared in stunned silence, his mouth slightly agape. The private's arm, though still a grotesque and shattered injury, could now be manipulated by the surgeon without causing him further agony or involuntary movements. The immediate result was profound and undeniable. The soldier, now calm, cooperative and free from pain, could be prepped for life-saving surgery with unprecedented speed and comfort. The aid station, usually filled with the sounds of suffering, was momentarily quiet, save for the distant rumble of artillery and the hushed murmurs of the medical team. A new, revolutionary possibility had just been unveiled, a testament to one medic's courage and ingenuity. The immediate result of Sergeant Riley's absurd method was nothing short of miraculous for the soldiers who experienced it. The young private, moments after the injection, lay still on the stretcher, his breathing evening out, a look of profound, almost disbelieving relief washing over his mud-streaked face. Captain Miller, initially skeptical and perhaps even a little annoyed by Riley's unconventional approach, quickly recognized the immense and undeniable value of this rapid, targeted pain relief. The ability to perform immediate critical interventions, such as stopping severe bleeding, setting complex fractures, or preparing for amputation, without the patient thrashing in agony, dramatically improved the speed, precision, and overall efficacy of battlefield surgery. It meant that shattered bones could be set more accurately, deeply embedded shrapnel removed with greater precision, and bleeding controlled more effectively, all without the added complication of a struggling, screaming patient. This not only saved precious time, but also reduced the risk of further injury during treatment. The psychological impact was equally significant, if not more so. Soldiers already facing the profound trauma of their injuries and the horrors of combat were spared the additional soul-crushing torment of conscious, excruciating pain during initial treatment. This not only preserved their morale and dignity, but also significantly reduced the likelihood of severe shock, which could be as deadly as the wound itself, often leading to complications and prolonged recovery. Word of Doc Riley's magic spread quickly through the ranks of the 1st Infantry Division, bringing a glimmer of hope to the wounded and a renewed sense of purpose and possibility to the medical teams who had often felt helpless in the face of such suffering. The repercussions of Riley's method extended far beyond the immediate relief it provided to individual soldiers. As more medics and surgeons were trained in the technique, often by Riley himself, the efficiency and effectiveness of frontline aid stations dramatically improved. Surgical teams could process casualties faster, more safely, and with better outcomes, thereby increasing the number of lives saved and limbs preserved. The method, initially viewed as unconventional, risky, and even absurd by some, quickly became a standard procedure for localized, severe injuries, particularly those involving the extremities. It wasn't a replacement for general anesthesia for major abdominal or chest wounds, but for the vast majority of extremity traumas, which were common on the battlefield. It was an absolute game-changer. The historical impact was profound and far-reaching. It demonstrated unequivocally that innovation, even from unexpected sources and under the most dire circumstances, could fundamentally alter the course of medical care in wartime. It highlighted the critical importance of localized nerve blocks as a powerful, rapid, and effective tool for pain management, paving the way for their more widespread and sophisticated use in civilian medicine after the war, particularly in emergency rooms and orthopedic surgery. The method became a testament to the ingenuity, courage, and unwavering dedication of individual medics who, faced with overwhelming challenges and limited resources, dared to think outside the box, to challenge established norms, and to prioritize the well-being of their patients above all else. It underscored the fact that true strength in medicine often comes not from grand technological advancements or complex machinery, but from simple, elegant, and effective solutions born from acute observation, a deep understanding of human anatomy, and a profound empathy for human suffering. The absurd method, once a whispered secret on the front lines, became a celebrated technique, saving countless lives and alleviating immeasurable pain, leaving an indelible and transformative mark on the history of military medicine and beyond. After the war, Thomas Riley returned to the United States, a quiet hero who never sought public recognition or accolades for his wartime innovations. He humbly used the GI Bill to complete his medical degree, driven by the same quiet determination that had guided him through the war. He eventually became a highly respected anesthesiologist, known for his calm demeanor and his pioneering work in regional anesthesia. He continued to advocate for and refine regional anesthesia techniques, teaching at a prominent medical school and publishing several influential papers that advanced the field. His wartime experiences had instilled in him a lifelong commitment to effective pain management, and he dedicated his entire career to ensuring that patients, whether on the chaotic battlefield or in a modern, sterile hospital operating room, received the most effective, humane, and dignified care possible. He passed away peacefully in 1988, having lived a life of quiet service, profound impact, and unwavering dedication to alleviating suffering. His legacy, though not widely known to the general public, lives on powerfully in the countless medical professionals who employ nerve blocks daily, a direct and enduring continuation of the absurd method he pioneered under the most brutal conditions of World War II. This is the true legacy of Sergeant Thomas Riley, not just the number of soldiers he spared from agony, though those numbers are immeasurable and extend into the hundreds, if not thousands, but the undeniable proof that even in the darkest times, even when everything seems lost, even when the whole world tells you that some suffering is inevitable and unavoidable, A few determined individuals, driven by compassion and ingenuity, can profoundly change history, one precise injection at a time, one precious moment of peace at a time, one life saved, one limb preserved, one spirit uplifted at a time. And in doing so, they prove that the human spirit, when tempered by suffering, ignited by righteous compassion, and guided by an unyielding will to serve, is stronger than any conventional wisdom, stronger than any resource limitation, stronger than any war machine. The medics like Riley did not just help win battles, they helped preserve the humanity of those who fought them. They remind us that true strength does not come from the quantity of weapons or the size of armies. It comes from what you're fighting for and why you refuse to surrender to despair, to pain, or to the limitations of the known. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change the world, one life, one moment, one act of courage at a time.